Well, we are right at noon, so we're going to get started. Thanks to everyone who is joining us. I know I can see folks continuing to join in, so thank you for being here for today's Lunch and Learn in honor of International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day to all of you, our women out there, our male allies, of course. I want to thank you for taking time today. I know there's lots of events going on and I've been to a couple already myself. They're all very inspiring, and I know this one is going to be as well. Before we get started, I would like to read a land acknowledgement. Burlington, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of the many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, our lands spanning from Lake Ontario to the Niagara Escarpment are steeped in Indigenous history. The territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. So as we get started, I want to make sure that you know how to engage with us during the conversation. So you can either post a question in the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar portal, or you can raise your hand to ask your question live, and we'll be able to hear you when you ask it. So we're going to try to leave a good amount of time to hear from you, and I'll give you a chance to ask questions of any of our panelists. So let's get to it. I'd like to introduce you to our two amazing Burlington women here. Leena Sharma Seth, wave to everybody. Lena is founder of Mending the Chasm, and an experienced facilitator, coach, trainer, and speaker. And I think one of the first times we met, you were organizing a community party and dance in your neighborhood, which was awesome. So also a great community booster. Lena has over 20 years experience in various leadership roles in Canada and Asia. Lena's worked for nonprofit, consulting, education, philanthropy, and supplier diversity spaces. She has leveraged her entrepreneurial spirit, her ability to adapt, and her intuitive ability to create authentically inclusive organizations and produce meaningful community impact, including working with the Halton Poverty Roundtable, the Tamarack Institute, and the Burlington Foundation. Lena has also served as a community mediator for more than a decade and has community conflict resolution services of Halton on her resume as well. So quite a stellar and diverse portfolio and background. Thank you, Leigh-Ann, for taking time to be with us. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. We also have with us Leena Allaire Perrault, who is a creative entrepreneur and the owner of a local decor boutique, Hugh La La. She amazingly, if you can believe this, opened her dream shop during the pandemic right here in her hometown of Burlington. And this makes her part of what has become known as the She-Covery, our economic post-pandemic and mid-pandemic recovery being led by women, which is incredible. As many of you also likely know, she has been a design and do-it-yourself expert for over 15 years on Cityline, Canada's longest running daytime talk show, providing expert advice with her trademark positive energy and sense of humor. And as you would expect, Leigh-Ann has the best Zoom background today.
Thank you.
You can see her skills in action as we get going. So I'd like to ask our first question to Lena and pass the mic over to you to really share your journey with us and speak to the unique challenges you faced, the insights you've learned along the way, and what you are working on these days. Lena, kick us off here.
For sure. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be a part of this conversation, to be, a part of this in the community where I live. I've had other conversations in other spaces, but it means something special to be a part of this conversation where I'm raising my family and where I've grown up. So thank you for this. And I like to open with, I tend to get reflective on International Women's Day. I think about my ancestors, the women who made decisions, who persevered, who charted the path that led me to where I am here today as a racialized settler ally, a woman who was a child of Indian immigrants on the treaty territory lands of the Anishinaabe, the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Métis, as you mentioned in your land acknowledgement. I hold a deep gratitude for that. I also reflect on the mentors and the women who held out their hands to me as they progressed on their journeys, the time that was spent, the way that leadership was modeled to me, the life stories and the wisdom that was shared, and the opportunities that were frankly made available that I might not have otherwise had. I also reflect on my role as a mentor. So on a day like this, I think about how am I ensuring that there's a ladder for others who are just as deserving and ready to be the contribution that they were called to offer. So I hold those in my heart, along with just, I have 2 daughters that I'm raising. So I think about what is the messaging for them? How am I celebrating them? I also honor the tension that I feel between this opportunity of a day like this. I think we were talking about this before we started, that this needs to be an ongoing conversation. So I love that. I have a tension in terms of I want to take a day like this to celebrate my accomplishments, our accomplishments, and just also push this idea that we continue to celebrate all throughout the year, that we recognize and integrate our stories, our accomplishments, and our contributions into our everyday thinking and mindset. And I know I'm not alone when I speak to that, but that's kind of what fills my spirit on a day like this. So now to me and kind of my journey, over the course of my life, I've stood on this ground, as a nonprofit leader, as a community builder, a daughter, a board member, an artist, a mom, a wife, a philanthropist, and most recently an entrepreneur. And so I thought there was a lot I could talk about, but I really wanted to talk about kind of that moment of stepping into my own calling and to kind of take that bet on myself, which was, I always like to say that moment was about the excitement being only incrementally greater than the fear around that leap. And so for me, I think, I established Mending the Chasm in 2019, and I get to work with leaders and organizations who are ready to build inclusive, equitable, and anti-racist cultures. At the time, I like to say that as a racialized leader in this community, I didn't often see myself in terms of representation. So to me, representation matters in terms of when we celebrate stories, are we making sure that we're capturing all of the stories, the diverse stories, the non-binary stories, all of them. And so for me, having a few people in my life, maybe not in this community, but who looked like me and were daring to start their own business, daring to invest in themselves, that was a powerful influence for me in terms of saying, okay, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And so I know that was part of what kind of gave me the courage. And, in my career, in the nonprofit sector and the other spaces that you mentioned that I worked in my bio, I have been working to advance equity and inclusion for most of my career. So it wasn't a complete deviation to step into this space, but I was noticing in the kind of 1 or 2 years prior to that decision that there was a calling emerging from deep within to step more fully into my own authenticity and to accept that I could no longer dim my shine or play small to fit into someone else's ideas of what I should be. And to me, that's a really, I think as women, we're often the first to discount ourselves, to say, oh, who am I to think that I can do this? Or, oh, that person can do it, but not me. And so really working through some of that stuff was integral to feeling the fear and doing it anyways. I've also had the privilege, you mentioned I work in supplier diversity. So I worked with a client over the last year, and one of the things that stuck with me was that women-owned businesses have access less than 3% of global supply chain contracts. And this number is much less for Black, Indigenous, and racialized women-led businesses. And if you just let that, sink in for a moment, we're in COVID, and we're, thinking about what is our economy going to look like after this. And so another statistic I think about is that, if women and men around the world participated equally as entrepreneurs, global GDP could rise by 3 to 6%, boosting the global economy by 2.5 to 5 trillion. And so I believe greater equity and inclusion needs to be a central part of our economic recovery planning post-COVID. And I do see that happening in a lot of spaces, sustainable development goals talk about that. And so I'm seeing a lot of conversations and readiness in our narrative that wasn't there a year ago. So I think what I'd also add is it's been deeply inspiring for me to connect with a community of women entrepreneurs. And so, Leanne, I'm so grateful to connect with you through this conversation. So may this be the beginning of more conversations and potentially collaboration. I'm a collaborator at heart. So it was, but for me, what sustained me and inspired me is seeing the tenacity of women, that the ways that women have pivoted, in this, in this pandemic, to find ways to continue to work in service of their calling. And so for me, as I continue in my work and trying to keep things going when they get hard, I'm really inspired by my sisters who are on the same journey. So one of the things I'm working on right now is that I just launched a project called the Inside Out Project, Our Future's Anti-Racist. And I thought it was powerful. It was a powerful moment to talk about this because 15 organizations from across Halton region and 80 leaders participated. So I should back up and say what inspired me to create it. So last summer, with everything that was going on with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, it was literally keeping me up at night to see that, okay, there was a readiness in our community that I've never seen before. And my fear was that if we waited until the economy bounced back, that the will might not be here in the same way. And so I was inspired to kind of dig deep and create an offering that would recognize the will that was alive right now, but also recognize the fact that budgets had been decimated, with everything that's going on. So it needed to be an accessible offering. And so I also partnered with a local charity. We were able to access some funding that would provide subsidies for charities to participate. And so the beautiful thing is, with 15 organizations on this journey, what I'm hoping for is to see a ripple that turns into a wave, because these organizations and leaders were ready. And the power that comes from having them connected to each other on the journey, to me, is I'm really curious to see what happens over the next year. February, we had the program in terms of the education. So once a week, we convened, and I would be transparent in saying I think I challenged leaders to come at this inclusion, equity, anti-racism work in a different way. I know some people are on the call today who were a part of that experience. Maybe if you want to share some of that, that's fine. But all this to say, I think what I want people to understand is, if I had not listened to that voice within that was telling me to do this, I was literally woken up at 1 a.m. one night with this idea. And my husband's like, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "I just need to get this down." And so that is now what the Inside Out Project is. But if I had listened to that voice that was telling me, like, "Who are you to do this? And how do you even know this is going to work?" And the truth is, it's a pilot, so we give ourselves space to tweak and learn. But the point is, we can't always wait for perfect, and we need to move and to listen to our spirits when there's an insight coming. And so I had one more thing I wanted to just share in terms of thinking about choose to challenge as the theme for this day. And I've seen really great inspirational posts across social media. But what I wanted to offer 3 things that I choose to challenge, and I think they're informed by my insight on the journey that I've been on. The first one is I choose to challenge my inner gremlin, that voice within. I've kind of alluded to that, but that voice that challenges our sense of belonging, our confidence, our sense of self-worth. To essentially say, like, "Not today, gremlin." I feel like there should be a T-shirt. And Leanne, if you don't have a T-shirt like that, I highly recommend it. So that's the first one. Because I say, the first battle that we lose is often in our heads and our spirits, right? And so really trying to, tap into our resilience and to know that we can move through fear and do it anyways. The second thing I choose to smash instead of challenge is binaries. So I have a community assumption that I offer in my work with clients that says binaries are bullshit. So excuse my language there. But binary, the idea of like an and or, that there's really only one way to do something, or two options. And this is where I kind of lean into my background as a peace and conflict studies, conflict transformation, practitioner, and with being a mediator. So what all that means is I often have a front row seat to people who are experiencing deep conflict. And many times what's not named is the fact that there's an unspoken assumption that for me to win in this conversation, the other person has to lose. And that's rarely true. And so the process of transformative mediation that we work in at Community Conflict Resolution Services of Halton, it's grounded in two principles, this idea of empowerment and recognition. And so I take that into life as well in terms of conversations I'm having. And so with empowerment, when you create a safe space for people to unpack conflict or to even engage with difference, we empower people to engage with what is difficult in a supported way. And so that's something that stayed with me, that, we have to meet people where they are and often meet ourselves where we are as well. Recognition happens so in community mediation, sometimes, we're working with neighbors, for example, who really have only communicated by yelling at each other over the fence or across their driveways because of whatever the issue, the noise or whatever that is. And so in our process, they have to sit across from each other to listen, maybe for the first time, to each other and to earnestly consider each other's perspectives. And, for me, I think there's something magical that happens when people humanize each other, when they hear each other's stories, and even better, they begin to see themselves in each other's stories. And so when that happens, the binary of win-lose melts into win-win. And so what is possible that would honor both of their needs becomes available to them. And so that's an insight to me around binaries, that, it's rarely an either or, it's usually an and conversation. And that's a mentor piece of advice that I hold. And then the last one is I just choose to challenge the status quo. So whether that's comments and mindsets like, this has always been the way we do things around here, or challenging other people's ideas, expectations, or beliefs about what someone like me, whether that's about my gender, my race, my ethnicity, my age, whatever that is, I have two choices in the face of other people's expectations. I can either get crushed under the weight of them, or remind myself that other people's expectations are none of my business, and that being able to look myself in the mirror at the end of the day to say that I stood in the fullness of my own values, my own authenticity, and used my voice, for me at this point in my life, is more important than taking on other people's stuff, so to speak. And so kind of in closing in my piece, I think what I live my life with and work to try to embody is this idea of how am I using my own privilege, my own power, and my own platform to facilitate the creation of space at tables that I'm sitting at, access to decision-making and resources that I have, and platforms that I use, of how can I use them for voices who have yet to be heard. So I hope that gives you kind of a sense of what I'm about.
Wow, that I was taking notes, and I can tell you that resonates with me on so many levels, and I'll talk about my own story a little later, but I do really appreciate you saying that and being so transparent. And one of the images that came to mind is door opener. One of the things that we can do as women, and you have done your whole career, and you've talked about that, is opening the door yourself and then inviting others through it. And that's a role that we can all play as women. More to come on that, and there was so many things I wanted to touch on, but I want to give Leigh-Ann an opportunity also to share your journey with us. There's a lot of the same themes, resilience, being willing to jump off that cliff and hope the parachute's there. That's how I described the decision to run for mayor, by the way. So Leigh-Ann, talk to us about your journey, some of the unique challenges that you faced. What got into you to open a bricks and mortar store in a pandemic during lockdown? God bless you for that.
Well, I want to take the opportunity to echo exactly what Lena had said, that I'm so grateful for this opportunity. And when we connected last week, I had made the comment about feeling potentially a little over my head with joining this group, because you're two very dynamic women. But at the same time, Lena, you were the one that said, listen, girl, like, accept the opportunity and believe that I deserve it. And so I do very much thank you for this platform. And prior even to us beginning today, I had mentioned that the fact that this really does need to be more than just a day, because I've spent my day so far listening to people's stories, and stories from people who wouldn't otherwise have a platform other than through opportunities such as this on a day like today. So I hope, and actually I'm going to challenge myself to use my own platform to help amplify voices and other people's stories, because that's where true learning comes from, when you're seeing things through the eyes of others and not just through their experience, but how that made them feel. I think the empathetic side of things is so important. And the only way that I've found, and saying that, I'll tell you, to get to where I am today, obviously life is a journey, but I've had to do a lot of work myself to be more open to opportunity and empathy. I think as women, it's kind of an expectation that we should just all be empathetic. It's a label that we tend to be put on us, and be vulnerable. And that vulnerability is sometimes taken as a negative, actually oftentimes taken as a negative. But I think I've had an experience for the last almost 20 years now, where I was taught to not be vulnerable because that was my weakness. And that built so many walls around me that I'm just realizing in the last few years, and within that time, and I'll talk about the journey, has allowed me to blossom to opening the store and collaborating. And Lena, you mentioned collaboration. And I will be completely honest, and potentially, I don't want to say that this would be shocking to anyone, but I was not a good collaborator. I consider myself an introverted extrovert. So I'm very much content in my own space and my own time, but I do very much enjoy people. But I, without a doubt, built some very strong Teflon walls around me from when I first started in the work world. So when I was 22 years old, I joined the corporate workforce, and fresh out of school. And I found myself, when we talk about sitting at the table, I was sitting with all predominantly men, a very much like the similar age bracket, a very similar mentality of how they approach their work ethic. And I had never experienced the corporate world before. So I was very much learning as I went. Having said that, there were women that also sat at the table, but it became acutely aware to me that I would be better off siloing myself in a protective nature, because I didn't, heaven forbid, you appear vulnerable or you appear weak. So as much as I think I went into the corporate world bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as a little cute young girl, which is a term, by the way, that was used quite often to describe me. Oh, she's so cute, if I shared an idea. That really had a programming effect on how I chose to present myself, almost to build this alter ego, if you will, in certain corporate spaces so that I would conform, because without doing that, I wouldn't be heard, because then you get labeled with other things, that I'm too dominant or too aggressive. So I had to be very tactful about how I presented my ideas, and also not to overshadow anyone else's ideas. So that for me was something that I have to say I spent probably a decade undoing. And that was a lot of internal work that I didn't realize. Like you truly don't realize when you're in that position how much you need to contort your body and yourself and your image. And then the damage that ultimately does to you as a person, where when you do have that realization, it's not even a realization. I remember quite clearly asking myself, who am I? Like, what do I stand for? What is my voice? And how am I using it on my own terms? So I spent, as I mentioned, nearly a decade in corporate. And I have to say, there were no shocking gender inequality experiences that I have to share. It was all of the, I guess you could call them microaggressions, those small things that build up over time. And the one thing that became very, very clear on my journey was I reached a point. I think a lot of people who become entrepreneurs and they leave the corporate world, they often will leave because they are potentially tired of being told what to do, that they want a level of freedom. And I became very aware of the fact that I'm actually great with being told what to do. I can be very accountable when given goals to achieve. I'm an overachiever naturally. I take those on as goals for myself, and I want to work my hardest and best for the greater good, for the corporation, the company, the team, whatever that may be. What didn't sit well with me anymore is that I was very tired with being told what I couldn't do. So coming to the table with ideas and saying, oh, that doesn't fit into our box. And that's not something that we as a collective team understand, but they would never claim to not understand it. Rather, it would just be an idea that would be so foreign to them because it was potentially new that they would shelf it. So that became a really pivotal point in my life where I just thought, you know what, I don't want to be told what I can't do anymore. I want the freedom to explore my own voice. So I left the corporate world and subsequently spent almost 10, coming up to 10 years now, working for myself, mainly in media. And that, I think, coming out of corporate with walls, I had the assumption that, again, as a woman in the corporate world, now focusing more on the media world, well, I need to build that fortress even higher because it's media, and who really is going to support me? It's completely competitive and it's racist, it's there's ageism involved, there's sexism involved. So again, the contortions actually exemplified, but in retrospect, a lot of that was self-induced. I think again, there wasn't a specific experience where I was told to lose weight, where I was told to be something that I wasn't. It was assumptions based on media and based on what I'd been told growing up, where I really wasn't being authentic. I know that that term itself is potentially overused, but it's taken me a long time to realize that although I stepped out of the corporate world, I stepped away from that table and decided to build my own damn table, which is what I did when I decided to go at it on my own. I realized probably 3 years ago that although I had built this beautiful big table, it was empty. And I had really shut myself off from collaboration out of fear that I wouldn't, receive the support in a way that I felt was authentic, because I self-imposed this idea within media that if you're going to help me, but what do you want? Like that it has to be this reciprocal thing. So I very much had a mistrust, especially in a lot of other women, because I'll tell you, as much as there are so many women in media that are shattering boundaries, 10 years ago, our voices were much smaller. And I don't feel that there definitely wasn't the same effect then as there is now. It was great. It was almost lip service support is how I interpret it. It's great to say, fix someone else's crown and all the great memes that are out there. But unless you're actually doing the work in supporting other people, that means nothing. So I would encourage people on a day like today, if you're going to post a meme, don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk. Like, what can you actively do behind the scenes outside of social media? Because again, it's easy to make things look perfect in social media and in media, but it's the work has to take place as well. So in realizing that I was sitting at this table by myself, again, self-induced, I really had to step back and realize that my voice didn't mean much if I had no one to share it with. And so that's where I really went internal, did a lot of the work myself, and work and self-care is not bubble baths and essential oils and, all of this like, oh, I'm having an enlightened moment. It was dirty. I sat in the mud for a very long time thinking about why am I feeling so unsupported, but also realizing that it's reciprocal. Asking myself, what have I done to support other women and to support the quality, the movement of equality, and just to say that I believe in equality does nothing. That's like saying it out loud is really the bare minimum, I think, of anything that anyone can do, that I wasn't actually putting in the work. So with that, realizing that I was feeling a little self-defeated, having my own little pity party, B, realizing that I absolutely wasn't putting in the work to support other women. And aside from that, just feeling quite lonely within, and again, I want to say that in the sense of like, I don't want to make that anyone else's fault other than myself. I had to start peeling those layers away. So what I came to realize is I am energized by people. I do crave connection, but I had put myself in such a position where there truly wasn't opportunity unless I made it myself. I couldn't sit on the couch. And I think so many times we sit and wait for things to happen. Oh, if only that person will be my savior, or that opportunity will come along, then those doors will open. And it's exactly what Lena said. I had to open the door myself. First, I built the door as well as building the table. Then I opened it, but then I had to hold that door open for other people to come through. So fast forward to following my dream of opening my little retail shop in the midst of a pandemic, because, life wasn't crazy enough. I just really decided that the best way for me to connect with people, it had to be in a way that was reciprocal, that I couldn't expect anything, because, and on that note, I am horrible with being vulnerable. And with that comes the inability to ask for help when I need it, because then there's the level of weakness that potentially falls into play. And that was really the true boundaries that I had built over the years, that I'm a woman, I can do it all on my own. I don't need any help. And that's what pushed everyone else away. So it wasn't until I said, I really want to connect. I want not only to help people, but to make that a reciprocal relationship with others, that I decided to follow my dream of opening the retail store, with the main goal of using that as a platform to support other women in their small businesses. So reaching out to small makers that potentially don't have their own platform, a lot of local companies, women that have connected with fair trade collectives, that are supporting other small Indigenous female communities that may not have any means whatsoever of reaching a target clientele like Burlington, Ontario, for example. So being able to connect those dots and truly then build a relationship that is so much more than business. It's the support ecosystem that has been the real fringe benefit of that. And that's when the beauty starts to blossom. So therefore, it's not reciprocal from a transactional standpoint of business. It's reciprocal as in supporting, loving one another, but loving their stories and being able to story tell and story share and receive that in an empathetic way where you can truly understand someone's path. And then that only can enrich your own journey. So that's, sorry, I feel like I just stopped.
So riveted. You didn't just stop, did you? That is also just resonates so strongly with me. And I'm an introverted extrovert too, right? My best friends when I was growing up were books. And I know a lot of folks wouldn't see that in me now, and it's taken some time to sort of develop the ability to speak in front of people and all of that. But here we are, and again, so much of what you said has resonated with me, and the notion of waiting for opportunity to kind of come. Right. I think I did that most of my career until I chose to go into politics. I just, put my head down and got busy working and aimed to be the best I could be. And other folks would come along and tap me on the shoulder and say, you should do this or you should do that. And opportunity came from other people. And the first time I had to say, no, this is what I'm going to do for me was when I ran for politics. And nobody was going to give me that. At all. And I think I shocked my whole family when I said I just signed up in 2006 to run the first time, and some of this will be familiar to folks on the call. I ran twice and lost before I won my first election, and so we're talking about resilience. We're talking about persistence and knowing in your heart what you feel you have to contribute to the world, and knowing that you have to know that for yourself first, right? That's what both of you have been talking about. You have to be able to look in the mirror and say, no, I can do this, and I'm good at this, and I'm passionate about it, and I'm going to keep trying. Until I get in, which I did, and here I am. And it was very, especially the choice to run for mayor was a real tough one. It was a really tough tough decision. And ultimately it was because I felt I had something to contribute. And, you know, as women, when we say I have something to contribute in some circles, that's seen as ambitious, and that's a negative when applied to women, right? You all remember the checklist in the last election of the flyer. All the attributes that were ascribed to me were all very negative, and all the attributes ascribed to one of my male fellow candidates was seen as positive. And that's, we're not much evolved from that, right? We have to continue to defend our desire to serve. And that's really what it comes down to. It's not about a title, it's not about a position, it is about a desire to serve the community. And you know, and that world, I'll just talk a little bit about my short story before we get into the Q&A. A lot of people, a lot of women especially, steer clear. So the most recent statistics of the number of mayors in this country who are women is 19%. 19, think about that. Not even close to half. And overall, at every single level of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, only 30% of elected officials are women. And we've had the ability to run almost for 100 years now. We've had the ability to vote and to run for a very long time. So, but having said that, not all women had the ability to vote and run at the same time. Indigenous women didn't get that right until the 60s. You know, so think about that. It took another 40 years after white women had the ability to vote and run for elected office that our sisters across this country had that ability. So, you know, when we talk about wanting to open the door behind us, hopefully we can speed up the clock a little bit and you know, and not take another generation and another decade. Couple of thoughts as you both were talking. Lena, you said feeling the fear and doing it anyway. I think that really resonates with me. I was terrified to run for mayor. It was like jumping off a cliff and hoping the parachute was there, and it was. And I can tell you the day after I won, there was another level of fear. Am I going to be able to actually do this? People, I feel the weight of the city on my shoulders. Can I do this? And the reality is I can't. We can. Right? It's what you were talking about, Leigh-Ann. That resonated with me so much that sometimes, especially when you are an entrepreneur as you are, I had my own business for 11 years in media. I ran most of it from my home office alone, right? You get used to
the lonely table.
It's a lonely table, and yet you have this vast audience and this vast, thousands of people who would read my columns or watch me on television and reach out to me, and I would know that there was an impact, but it still obviously feels very lonely, and that's one of the things that we have experienced, all of us, very keenly. Whatever our jobs were before the pandemic, we're all literally in our houses, in our 4 square feet that is captured by a Zoom call, doing what we do and trying to connect in new ways. And so I'm really struck by that. And one of the things I like having a challenge for ourselves. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is, Leigh-Ann, you mentioned earlier not wanting to be vulnerable. That resonates with me so deeply. And I learned how to think my way through things and rationalize and argue. I became a columnist, right? I became a speaker on television where you were defending your point of view. That's what I'm used to. And realizing, especially through the pandemic, that logic and rationality is only part of who we are, and people need to see your heart. And so my challenge for myself is to lead more with my heart and not my head, and not be afraid that people will see that as a sign of weakness because I'm a woman leading from the heart, and pivoting to lead from the heart. And the head stuff's still important, but that's not the place I want to lead from. So And the other thing that I've been really struck by is that there's not one way to lead as a woman. There's not one woman, right? Even though we're celebrating International Women's Day, there is a vast array of diversity in how to lead, how to be in our space, and we need to welcome. Leigh-Ann, you wanted to say something.
You know what, you just hit on something, and not to like take this in a different direction, but you just hit on something that is so fundamentally, it's been a fundamental learning for me, and I think amplified through being in media, that the thing that has become the most clear, like crystal clear for me, especially when we're talking about women and this competitive nature and how you say like, you haven't been supported by every woman. What I've come to realize is the thing that makes, there is no sense of competition because no one can be you. And if someone else gets an opportunity over you, it's because of them, not because of you. And it's such a simple thing, but once I came to that realization, all of the stress and pressure just melted away. That if I can just be me and someone is going to either hire me or work with me or be attracted to me from my heart, then that's the right fit, that the energy matches in that instance. But you can't fit a square peg into a round hole. So the more you try, that's when you create the tension. So being able just to strip that away and focus on your heart and speak from your heart, you will attract the right people with the right opportunities to you, instead of building these walls and feeling like you need to be siloed in that sense of competition. So and the other side note that I just wanted to make is, as a mom of two boys, when you say moving the needle faster for the next generation, I think having the not only open heart, but open heart with an open conversation to the little girls and the little boys about this. I have many kitchen table conversations with my boys focused around, well, and actually I don't even want to say focused around equality. I think the conversations are much more layman's than that, in the sense that they don't see inequality unless we really draw it out, but it's more just suggesting and crafting behaviors and what's appropriate and maybe what's stifling to other people, in particular women, that they're very open. If you tell a child facts, they'll accept them. If you tell a child opinion, they'll also accept that. So we have to be very, very careful about what we're really feeding our children, and making sure that we're giving them factual information that they can build their own opinions on.
Good point. Lena, did you want to jump in? Go ahead.
I totally did.
I can see you wanting to go.
This is so lovely, and I know it's not scripted, but Leanne, I appreciate what you're sharing. And what I would add is this idea of like, I ground myself in an abundance mindset. I don't, and to me that really, I don't feel competitive in my spirit, and I never really have. And I always wonder, is something wrong with me? But it's like, to your point, Leanne, like what's meant for me is coming for me, and that's what I root myself in. And what differentiates us is what will connect others, because if we meet people where they are, then that that connection and alignment will happen automatically and naturally. Sometimes we try to, as you said, fitting the square peg into the circle hole, and it's not working. And it might be, one of my principles is I will recognize when I think I'm out of scope, or maybe there isn't that fit, and I will let clients know and say, look, I think there's a better fit. And this is about all of us progressing. And so I know that's probably not everybody's ethos, in terms of, some people are driven by competition, so I don't want to take that away. But for me to move and to be collaborative, I really have to ground myself in the fact that I think there's no shortage of things and opportunities out there, and to recognize that what's meant for me will land. So
I love that. I love the phrase abundance mentality, and it's a perfect segue to the poem. So we're going to get that up there. It is exactly what this speaks to. So I'm just going to read it quickly. It's from the poet Rupi Kaur. Women have been starved of space for so long that when one of us finally makes it into the arena, we're made to feel there isn't enough room for all of us. That if we're not careful, another woman might come along and take our spot. But space doesn't work like that. Look at all the men in the arena, getting stronger as their numbers multiply. More women in the arena means more room for all of us to rise. really speak that it's exactly what you're talking about, Lena, that inviting women to come in all of our different colors and diverse opinions and views and the different ways that we will all do things, and welcoming that and embracing that is just, it's so important. And you know, it's been documented in study after study that when you bring women around a board table or you bring women to politics, that it gets better. It gets better, it gets more reflective of the communities, better decisions are made, and we have a stronger community. You had quoted some stats earlier, Lena, to that effect. So I'm going to pause there. I could talk to the two of you for the rest of the day, really, but I do want to pause. We've got about 15 minutes left and see if we've got some questions from the floor, if anyone wants to jump in. I know we have also some awesome women on the call, you know, accomplished women in their own right who have been opening doors as they've and welcoming people through. So the floor is yours for a few for our remaining minutes. So we've got Angela Bellgaard. You are the first I see. We'll promote you in. Hello, Angela.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I'm Angela Bellgaard. I'm the Indigenous lead with Our Kids Network. And I just wanted to, first of all, acknowledge that we are in such phenomenal land here in the traditional territory. And thank you for all of you for recognizing that and for also including Indigenous entrepreneurs and Indigenous women in your talk. This is probably the first time I've ever participated in a forum like this where that has been acknowledged. So I appreciate that as an Indigenous person. Tell me, what would you say are some unique challenges in the Burlington area for Indigenous women to be entrepreneurs? I mean, I really appreciate the personal aspects that you're talking about, the fear and how that excitement just incrementally more than the fear. I love that. And making your own door, your own table. Sing it, sisters. I mean, this is what Indigenous people have been doing for so long. But is there anything that maybe Indigenous women have some unique challenges in the Burlington area, or what can we do to help to overcome those?
That is a great question. Lena, do you want to take that one first, and then we'll go to Leigh-Ann? Go ahead.
Sure, and I would actually turn that around, because I'm not Indigenous, and I can make some assumptions about what I think the challenges are, and I can extrapolate kind of from my experience as a racialized woman. But really, I don't know if there's anybody on the call who has that identity and would want to speak to that. To me personally, I try not to speak for the voice of someone who's not in the room necessarily. But if I could maybe extrapolate from a racialized woman's perspective, I think it really is about representation, and you know, that if you can't be what you can't see. When you don't see yourself in leadership, when you don't see yourself in systems, when you see, I feel like as someone who, from my perspective and my location, it bothers me to see Indigenous culture, I'm going to say, like from having a consumptive perspective around it, that it's something to be consumed or a box to check. And for me, something, and I don't know how that translates into Indigenous women who are working to progress through an entrepreneurship journey, in terms of seeing that connection, or you know, there's almost a knee-jerk reaction sometimes, like, okay, I'm just going to buy myself a dream catcher or burn, you know, smudge, or like, you know. And so for me, I think I wonder about how that journey is influenced, or how you lead yourself when there isn't necessarily a path carved for you. And from my work in the nonprofit sector, I know I really struggled, and I still, in my practice, I'm working to align with Indigenous practitioners, because I get asked to do things that I think an Indigenous voice should be doing, for example, and that's not my place. I'm a South Asian woman. I can speak to my context. I can challenge anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, but it's not my place to speak for that community. And so I wonder about that. I don't know, Angela, if that's really an answer, but that's just something that was alive as I listen.
Thank you so much. And I do appreciate you not speaking for Indigenous, but I really appreciate how you expressed that you can extrapolate from your position as a racialized person. I even have trouble sometimes with that term racialized, but absolutely, like this is it. We all need to learn together, because there's so many similarities, I think, in our populations as just as women, and then, you know, being on the edge of this stuff. So thank you so much, everybody. I absolutely appreciate everything you said. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Angela. And I just want to add, like, I am comfortable with racialized, but please nobody assume that every, you know, person who's not socialized as white is going to be comfortable with racialized. For some people, it's like BIPOC. Nobody wants to hear that anymore. No, so all the humility I do or I live with in this work is that you'll never find the term that will honor everybody. We have to, language is fluid in this work. And so I know for me, I can personally live with the term racialized. You know, it's not perfect, but Angela, I appreciate you for naming that.
Diversity, right? There's no one way to be a woman. Leigh-Ann, did you want to jump in there at all?
I would echo exactly what Lena said, that I certainly don't feel like I'm in a position to speak for and to give a lot of advice. However, from a very macro perspective, the only piece of advice that I would give to you and any woman asking that question, any person, quite frankly, asking that question, would be coming from media, where my sole purpose for many years has been storytelling. I would say that when we talk about representation and underrepresentation, the best gift that any business can give the world, especially if it was an Indigenous business or someone of color, whatever the gender is, would just be to tell your authentic story. Because the more storytelling of every color of the rainbow, of every ethnicity, that helps to create that sense of equality. But at the same time, telling your own personal story not only gives like the representation element, but gives the heart association to the business itself. And that's where connections are built, brands are built. I think the storytelling is the most important piece. Often people call it the brand, but there can be brands that lack a narrative. If you really focus on the heart story, I think then that will certainly open opportunity.
Okay, I have to add one more thing.
Oh, go ahead, Lena.
The other thing I would add is, you know, Leanne, you talked about self-care, right? And so I love that we are talking about that here, because I think it's Audre Lorde who said something to the effect of, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that in itself is an act of political warfare. And I'm going to just take a moment here. In a society, in a structure that really was created, not created for people who look like me and who look like, you know, some of the communities we've talked about here, to prioritize yourself and preserve, and to decide where and when you share your story, and to decide, and you get to decide that. And I think sometimes
absolutely,
in service of trying to advance something and to conform to a structure in a society, we lose ourselves a little bit because we think that's what we have to do to be. And I think what I would add for my Indigenous sisters and brothers in the community is that, you know, we have to celebrate our stories and to take care of ourselves, and to recognize that our journeys are not necessarily going to look like the dominant culture journey, and to honor that. So.
It's a great point, and I can say one of the challenges I know folks in our Indigenous community face, and I've had some conversations recently about this, is it's having such a small group, and how do you find each other? Right? Is there a way for people to connect with each other? And that's starting to change in the past year. And there's a great organization, look it up online, called Grandmother's Voice, that is trying to connect people with Indigenous resources and those storytellers and business owners in Halton and beyond. And so I know I, having visited the site a few times recently, just to find out, you know, what is happening. It has to move beyond, and one of you touched on it. It has to move beyond the ceremonial piece, right? We do that. We have a flag raising at the city. We have certain, you know, ceremonies at various times throughout the year. But it's got to be more, and those are good. Those are good to highlight that you know, to shine a light on those that part of our community and to celebrate that. But it can't stop there, right? And so I think the challenge is what comes next. And I can tell you, this is a long journey for me personally, and anyone on the call that has ideas, mayor@burlington.ca, please reach out. I'm so interested in that conversation, and anyone in our community who's part of a group that is a minority group that is unorganized in some ways, or it's hard to find each other for support. The dialogue is one of the most important things that we do, is to just create a place to hear each other.
We do have one more question, Mayor.
Okay.
So I'm going to allow Arfa Dar to speak.
Awesome. Hey, Arfa, welcome.
Hey, Arfa.
You're off mute now. Go ahead.
I am off mute. So thank you, ladies.
Welcome.
Lena, I know, and the mayor, I joined in and I fought for my seat in your inaugural ceremony. So I know you or know of you, and Leigh-Ann, great to hear your stories as well. This is such a robust panel of women, and you're here sharing your exciting stories and empowering all of those that have logged on to this call. My call to you, Mayor, is now being the lead, being a female, being in a position of power, wearing the pants for the city. Where can we put this day into a moment of continuity? Where can we leave this as a legacy? You have the options to create something at the city for generations to follow. I'm asking you from a citizen perspective at this point, how can the city make this day into a legacy for all of us women who have voices that need a platform to take off?
What a great question, and thank you for that challenge. It's like you read my mind, and I'm going to show you my notes. What I put, you probably won't be able to see it, but I put monthly women's talk right there, and put a star beside it. I think having more opportunities to come together like this, I'm a huge believer in dialogue. Distinct from debate, dialogue is about deeply listening to each other. It's about coming to the table with an open heart and an open mind to hear the stories of other people, and then from that, together, creating what the next step should be and what we should do together. And I receive that challenge, Arfa. Thank you. I will do whatever I can, and I'm also well aware that I don't have all the good ideas. I don't have a corner on the best ideas, and would also look for that to be a collaborative process that emerges from the community as we talk about how we can advance this conversation. It is so important, and we know that we still have a long way to go. Right? We still have a long way to go for women's equality, for racialized women's equality, if I can use that word, for all of the people in our community who don't feel that they have a voice that matches the words that they have to tell us. And that's really key, right? But
I think on that note, for people who aren't hearing the voice, I think the key is exactly what you've touched on. We need more people speaking and speaking up and sharing their stories. And that's where then people can find their tribe and the support system. And knowledge is the answer to a lot of society's problems. And I judge everything based on intent. And this whole, the element of cancel culture that we have now, I often try to pump the brakes a little bit before forming any judgment, because oftentimes we're judging people on their lack of knowledge. When they're given the platform and there's no intent, they're not intending to be necessarily offensive. They just don't know otherwise. So I think if having a platform where you as the mayor can spearhead these conversations, it just broadens that level of knowledge for everyone to absorb. And then that's where the empathy comes in, the understanding. And then that, I really truly believe, maybe naively, starts to level things out for all of us.
I agree. I know you want to jump in there. Go, Lena.
Yeah, I know our time is up. What I would and I think the question, the thing that we're not really naming is that there's a lot of trauma in our systems. And so sometimes, you know, I'm not a cancel culture advocate myself, but there is so much trauma and pain in the system. And so sometimes there isn't patience for people's well-intentions, because the pain that lands after that well-intended but traumatically impacting thing is why there's this kind of tension, and why I think so. I try to kind of create compassion within myself for seeing call out, because I recognize that it's probably a sign of how, if you think about, you know, 400 years of you know, anti-Black racism and all of that. And so not to make, and that's one example, but when you think about oppression, and for women as well, like there's that whole trope of like angry women and angry, it's like, if you think about the roots of it, it's a sign of it, there's trauma. And so like within, I think it's a really, what I invite everyone to do is, as much as ARFA challenged the mayor and said, hey, what are you going to do? What are we all going to do? Because culture building for Burlington is everybody's responsibility, not just the poor mayor. I will not put all of that on your shoulders. You're leading and creating space, and I honor you for that. But this is everybody's responsibility, and to dig deep. And Leigh-Ann, you talked about doing that work. That's what I hope people are leaving with, that how am I going to do my work? You know, that's
well, and with that, when my comment previous, quite anecdotal, coming from a privileged white woman. So, and I think that that's where a lot of my work also lies, and in the knowledge and being open to having the uncomfortable conversations. The more that we're ignorant to them and we close our minds to them, that's where you can take empathy and throw it right out the window, because ignorance is not bliss.
absolutely.
Wow. Just wow. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining and for really opening yourself up in a way that is not always seen. It's not usual, right? You have really shared from the heart your journey, but also the complexity of the issues that we face. And I'm just so thrilled that you agreed to be on this panel, and that you have come to this panel with such an open and transparent approach. And I received the challenge, and I do really like the notion that I can't do it alone. You can't do it alone, Lena. You can't do it alone, Leigh-Ann. We have to do this together. And each person will contribute in a different way from their place, right? So one of the things people have heard me say through the pandemic is we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And that is very true. Yeah. It is very true. Some of us do have a more privileged boat, and I count myself in that space. And so we have an obligation to do more reflective of the space that we occupy, and also give some tools and give some help to the folks that are in some cases drowning through this pandemic. And it's a metaphor for the pandemic, but it's really about life. It's really about where we are as a country in our journey for true equality. And we're not there yet. We are not there yet. So this is a conversation that is to be continued. And I hope you will all come back. We're going to put our heads together in my office. And I really do appreciate and welcome and hope you will reach out to me at mayor@burlington.ca if you have ideas for how we can continue this dialogue in different ways. If you have people that whose voices need to be heard, I need to know who they are. And one of the great parts of my job is meeting incredible people in our community. And having said that, there's many, many wonderful, amazing people in this community that I don't know, and I want to know, and want to give them a voice. So with that, I will conclude our proceedings here. It is being recorded. We will send this to Cogeco, and they have agreed to rebroadcast that. So we'll find out when those air dates are, to spread the word and to spread your voices. Lena, thank you. Leigh-Ann, thank you. Thank you to my amazing team for putting this together as well. It has been truly inspiring, and we have our challenges before us. So choose to challenge, and happy International Women's Day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.